The twin suns of Xyrus Prime hung like molten coins in a sky bleached pale blue by dust, their heat pressing down on the dunes until the air itself shimmered like liquid glass. Queen Vera of Clan Solarian stood atop the obsidian ridge known as the Spine of Ashes, her white skin gleaming faintly against the endless ochre sea of sand. Her long, silver-white hair, so pale it seemed spun from moonlight, flowed behind her like a banner caught in a phantom wind. Around her, the nobles of her court murmured in hushed, skeptical tones, their armor polished to mirror-bright perfection, their weapons sheathed more for ceremony than combat. They had come not to fight, but to observe a spectacle, the last stand of the so-called human warriors against the mercenary hordes of the Iron Maw. Vera had heard the stories, of course, tales whispered by traders, exaggerated by desert scavengers, embellished by drunken storytellers in smoky taverns on the fringe worlds. Humans, small, fragile, short-lived creatures with soft skin and no natural defenses, were said to fight with the fury of star-born demons, to laugh in the face of death, to turn certain defeat into impossible victory through sheer, stubborn will. She had laughed outright when a trembling envoy from the neutral sector described how a handful of humans had held off 300 Gorthan slavers on the ice fields of Krell 7. Myths, she had declared, swirling her cup of chilled nectar. Poetic fictions meant to comfort the weak. To her, humans were curiosities at best, biological anomalies with curious emotions and chaotic social structures. Warriors? Never. Yet here she stood, drawn not by belief but by boredom, watching through her ocular lens as the battle unfolded below. The Iron Maw, a patchwork army of cyborg raiders, mutated berserkers, and hired killers from a dozen species, had cornered the human squad near the ruins of an ancient aqueduct. They numbered nearly 200. The humans? Just 9. Among them stood Joran Vale. He wasn't tall by human standards, nor broad-shouldered like the armored Xyrian knights. His gear was patched, scorched, and visibly scavenged, boots held together by wire, a faded gray jacket with the insignia of some forgotten Earth battalion half burned away. His dark hair was cropped short, his jaw set in a permanent grimace of exhaustion, but his eyes, those were alive, sharp, intelligent, and burning with a quiet intensity that Vera, even from a distance, could sense through her scope. The first charge came like a tidal wave of metal and muscle. The Iron Maw didn't believe in finesse. They believed in overwhelming force. The humans didn't flinch. Instead, Joran barked a single word, "Cover!" and his squad moved as one organism. 3 dropped to one knee, firing precise bursts from compact pulse rifles. 2 scrambled up the broken stone columns, setting up makeshift sniping perches. The others formed a rotating shield wall with their bodies, using reinforced panels torn from a downed skiff. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't glorious like the duels Vera's warriors practiced in the palace arenas. But it worked. A cyborg lunged toward Joran, its left arm a whirring saw blade, right arm a plasma cannon. Joran sidestepped, not with the fluid grace of a Xyrian duelist, but with the ugly, efficient jerk of someone who'd survived too many close calls. He jammed a vibroknife into the joint beneath the cyborg's jaw, twisted, and kicked it sideways into 2 charging berserkers. Then, without pause, he grabbed a smoke grenade from his belt and hurled it into the enemy's flank. The chaos that followed wasn't orchestrated, it was exploited. His team moved through the confusion like ghosts, cutting throats, disabling weapons, dragging wounded comrades to safety. Vera's amusement faded. One of her generals, Lord Corin, chuckled beside her. "Look at them scurry, like sandrats in a dust storm. They'll be crushed before noon." Vera didn't answer. She watched as a human medic, small, freckled, barely out of adolescence, crawled through open fire to reach a fallen comrade. Bullets kicked sand around him. One grazed his shoulder. He didn't stop. He dragged the wounded man behind cover, pressed a sealant to the bleeding wound, and slapped his cheek until the man's eyes fluttered open. Then he turned, picked up a fallen rifle, and fired 3 shots that dropped a charging brute twice his size. "Humans don't leave their own," Joran had once said in a rare interview intercepted by Xyrian intelligence. "Not even when it's stupid." Now Vera understood. The tide turned not with a roar but with a whisper. The humans began luring the Iron Maw into the aqueduct's narrow channels, where their numbers became a liability. Traps, improvised, brutal, effective, sprang from the sand. Buried pulse mines triggered by tripwires, acid canisters hidden beneath false floor panels, even a crude sonic emitter that made cyborg implants shriek in feedback. The mercenaries, used to butchering disorganized colonies, found themselves outmaneuvered by a squad that thought faster than they fought. Then came the moment Vera would replay in her mind for cycles to come. Joran stood alone in the central archway, his squad pinned behind him. He was bleeding from a gash across his ribs. His left arm hung limp, but his rifle was steady. A hulking warlord of the Iron Maw, 8 feet tall, armored in fused bone and salvaged starship hull, stepped forward, laughing, and tossed aside his plasma cannon. "Come, little meat," it growled in broken universal. "Let me crush you proper." Joran didn't speak. He simply raised his rifle, fired a single round into the warlord's open mouth, then dropped the weapon and charged. What followed wasn't a duel. It was a dance of desperation. Joran used the warlord's size against it, ducking under swings, driving his good elbow into pressure points, scrambling up its back like a climber scaling a cliff. The warlord roared, tried to grab him, but Joran jammed a thermal charge down the seam of its neck armor and leapt clear just as it detonated. The explosion sent a shockwave through the battlefield. Silence fell for 3 heartbeats. Then the surviving humans surged forward, shouting in a language Vera didn't understand but felt in her bones. The Iron Maw broke. From the ridge, Vera's laughter was gone. Her fingers gripped the edge of her cloak so tightly her knuckles turned ivory. "That was not myth," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Lord Corrin frowned. "They won by trickery, your radiance, not honor." "Honor doesn't win wars," she replied. Her gaze fixed on Joran as he limped toward his fallen medic, helped him stand, and clapped him on the back with a grin that was equal parts pain and pride. "Survival does." She descended the ridge before her advisors could protest, her white robes trailing in the sand, her guards scrambling to keep pace. By the time she reached the aqueduct, the humans had formed a loose circle around their wounded, rifles half-raised but not aimed. They looked exhausted, wary, but not afraid. Joran stepped forward, one hand raised in what Vera recognized from diplomatic archives as a human gesture of peace. His face was streaked with soot and blood, but his eyes met hers without flinching. "You're Queen Vera," he said, voice rough but clear. "We saw your banners. Didn't expect royalty to watch street brawls." A few of his squad chuckled weakly. One coughed. Vera studied him. Up close, he was even less impressive physically. Lean, scarred, missing a front tooth. But there was a weight in him, a stillness beneath the fatigue. "I came to witness a myth," she said. "I leave having seen something far stranger. Stranger than white-skinned, white-haired aliens who think humans are fairy tales?" he asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. She blinked. Then, to the astonishment of her courtiers, a genuine laugh escaped her, light, surprised, almost girlish. "You have no idea how many poets I've silenced with that belief." Over the next few hours, Vera's medical drones tended to the human wounded. She learned their names. The medic was Ren, the sniper pair were twins named Tova and Mickey. The demolitions expert was a quiet woman called Lyra who spoke only in grunts and gestures. And Joran Vale, former field surgeon turned frontline commander after the collapse of Earth's Eastern Coalition, told her, in halting but honest words, why they were on Xyrus Prime. They weren't mercenaries. They weren't scouts. They were refugees, survivors of a war that had scorched their world, seeking passage to the neutral systems. The Iron Maw had ambushed them at the spaceport, demanding their ship as ransom. The humans refused. Hence the battle. "You fought 200 for a rusted freighter?" Vera asked, incredulous. "For each other," Joran corrected gently. "The ship's just metal. They're family." That night, under a sky dusted with unfamiliar constellations, Vera invited them to her mobile command pavilion. A vast, shimmering tent woven from bioluminescent silk, suspended above the dunes on anti-grav struts. Inside, her courtiers whispered behind jeweled fans, eyeing the humans as one might observe dangerous animals in a zoo. But Vera seated Joran at her right hand, served him spiced nectar in a crystal goblet, and asked him questions, not about tactics, but about Earth, about music, about why humans cried when they laughed too hard. He told her of rainforests that sang with life, of cities that floated above oceans, of songs passed down for centuries about love and loss and stars they could no longer reach. She told him of Xyrian sky whales that migrated between planets on solar winds, of sand gardens that bloomed only during eclipses, of the Great Silence. A century-long meditation her ancestors undertook to end a civil war. They talked until dawn. The next morning, Lord Corrin approached her in the meditation chamber, his face tight with disapproval. "Your radiance, these humans are uncivilized. They smell of sweat and gunpowder. They do not bow. They interrupt. They live? Vera interrupted, her voice calm but edged with steel. While our warriors practice choreographed duels in courtyards, they fight to breathe another hour. There is honor in that, Corin. You simply refuse to see it. He bowed stiffly and withdrew. Later that day, a distress call crackled over the comms. A Zyrian settlement to the east, home to scholars and artisans, was under siege by a splinter faction of the Iron Maw, reinforced with stolen war mechs. The garrison was outnumbered 10-1. Vera's generals recommended evacuation. We cannot risk the royal guard on a lost cause, one argued. Before Vera could respond, Joran stepped into the war room, his squad behind him, armor repaired with Zyrian nanopatches, weapons recharged. We'll go, he said. You are wounded, Vera said. So are they, he replied, nodding toward the holographic feed showing civilians huddled in a temple basement, children clinging to elders. Vera looked at her generals. They looked away. She turned back to Joran. Why would you risk your lives for strangers? He shrugged. Because someone has to. She gave him command of a light assault skiff and half a dozen drones. No royal escort. No fanfare. Just a nod that said more than any speech. What happened at the town of Lyrith became legend. The humans didn't storm the gates. They infiltrated through the irrigation tunnels, disabled the Warmech's power cores with jury-rigged EMPs, and created diversions so chaotic the mercenaries turned on each other. Joran personally carried 3 children out of the burning archive, shielding them with his own body as plasma fire rained down. Ren set up a field hospital in the town square under enemy fire, stitching wounds while Lyra laid mines at the entrance to buy him time. When Vera arrived with the royal guard, too late to fight, but just in time to witness the aftermath, the townspeople were weeping not from fear but gratitude. They pressed flowers into the humans' hands, offered them water from their last clean cistern. A young girl, no older than 6, placed a hand-knotted bracelet around Joran's wrist and whispered, "You smell like thunder, but your eyes are quiet." Vera watched from a distance, her heart a storm in her chest. That evening, she summoned Joran to the palace gardens, not the grand reception halls, but the private oasis behind the throne wing, where sand lilies bloomed only under twin moons. The air was cool, scented with petrichor and jasmine. She wore no crown, only a simple silver circlet. "You could leave," she said, not looking at him. "My fleet will escort you to the neutral zone. Safe passage. No questions." He was silent for a long moment. "And if I don't want to leave?" She turned. The moonlight caught the silver in her hair, the vulnerability in her eyes. "Then you must explain why a human warrior would stay in a world that once laughed at his kind." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint tang of antiseptic on his skin, the warmth of his breath. "Maybe I'm tired of running," he said softly. "Maybe I saw something worth staying for." Her breath hitched. "And maybe," he added, a hint of that dry humor returning, "your sand lilies are prettier than Earth's roses." She laughed. A real laugh this time, full-throated and bright. "They are not, but I appreciate the lie." He smiled. "Not a lie, just perspective." In the weeks that followed, Joran and his squad were granted provisional sanctuary. They trained Vera's elite guard not in flashy swordplay, but in adaptive combat, in field medicine, in the art of turning weakness into advantage. The humans, in turn, learned Zyrian customs, tasted fermented skyfruit, and, much to Ren's delight, discovered that Zyrian children loved Earth cartoons. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. Traditionalists called the humans barbarians. Some nobles refused to share a meal with them. But when a border skirmish flared with a rival clan, it was Joran who devised the strategy that reclaimed 3 lost outposts without a single fatality. When a sandstorm threatened to bury the capital's power core, it was Lyra who jury-rigged a shield using scavenged ship parts. And when Vera's younger sister fell ill with a rare off-world virus, it was Joran, the former field surgeon, who stayed by her side for 3 days, adjusting treatments, monitoring vitals, even singing old Earth lullabies when the fever spiked. The Queen visited every night. She brought him tea. They spoke little, but the silence between them grew comfortable, then intimate. One night, as the twin moons cast silver paths across the hospital floor, Vera asked, "Why did you become a soldier if you're a healer at heart?" Joran looked up from his notes, weary but clear-eyed. "Because healing isn't just about stopping blood. It's about stopping the things that make people bleed in the first place." She didn't answer, but when she left, her hand brushed his, and neither pulled away. The turning point came during the Festival of Twin Moons, when the entire capital gathered to celebrate unity. Vera, in full regalia, stood on the balcony to address her people. But before she could speak, a hidden assassin, hired by the disgraced Lord Corrin, fired a sonic dart from the crowd. It was aimed at her heart. Joran, standing at the edge of the royal dais, moved faster than thought. He shoved Vera aside, took the dart in his shoulder, and tackled the assassin before the crowd even registered the threat. Chaos erupted, but Joran, bleeding and dizzy, held the would-be killer down with one hand while shouting, "Don't panic! It's over!" Later, in the infirmary, Vera sat by his bedside, her white hair unbound, her face stripped of makeup and pretense. "You could have died," she whispered. He grinned weakly. "Would have been embarrassing after surviving the Iron Maw." She took his hand. "Why do you keep saving me?" "Because," he said, meeting her gaze, "someone has to show you that humans aren't myths. We're just people. Messy, stubborn, sometimes stupid people who care too much." Tears welled in her eyes, something no Zyrian noble had seen since her coronation. "Then let me care too," she said. Months passed. Joran's squad chose to stay, integrated into Zyrian society as advisors, teachers, even artisans. Ren opened a clinic that blended Earth and Zyrian medicine. Lyra designed eco-shields that made desert farming possible in previously barren zones. And Joran became Vera's closest confidant, her strategist, and eventually her consort. Their wedding was held not in the grand throne room, but in the sand garden where they'd first spoken as equals. There were no grand speeches, only vows spoken in two languages, witnessed by friends from two worlds. When Vera kissed him, the crowd, human and Zyrian alike, cheered until the dunes echoed. Years later, when their twin daughters, Lyra and Senna, with their mother's white hair and their father's stubborn glint in their eyes, ran laughing through the palace corridors, chasing mechanical fireflies, Vera would sometimes pause and watch them, her heart full. She never laughed at myths again. She lived one. And on quiet nights, when the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the stars emerged like scattered diamonds, she and Joran would sit on the palace balcony, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the sand gardens below. Proof that the most powerful warriors aren't those who conquer worlds, but those who build them together. Years passed like shifting dunes, reshaping the landscape of both empire and heart. Joran and Vera ruled not as conqueror and consort, but as partners, she with the wisdom of ancient bloodlines, he with the pragmatism of a survivor who had seen civilizations rise and crumble. Their daughters, Lyra and Senna, grew under twin suns and shared stories. Tales of Earth's oceans told by their father, legends of sky whales sung by their mother. The court had learned to accept, then admire, Joran's unpolished honesty, his habit of fixing broken irrigation drones with spare parts from his old rifle, his laughter that still startled nobles during solemn feasts. But peace, like desert water, is always temporary. The first tremor came not from war, but from silence. Deep space monitors on the far rim of Zyrian territory began reporting anomalies, entire freighter convoys vanishing without distress calls, asteroid outposts going dark, comms relays blinking out one by one. At first, the Royal Science Directorate dismissed it as solar interference. But when a diplomatic vessel from the Virith Concordat, a longtime ally, failed to arrive for treaty renewals, and its last known coordinates pointed to empty void, unease spread like frost in the sand. Joran reviewed the data late one night in the palace war room, his fingers tracing star charts projected onto the obsidian table. He hadn't worn his old field jacket in years, but tonight, he'd pulled it on, out of habit or perhaps premonition. Vera entered silently, her white hair braided with strands of starlight thread, a gift from their daughters. "Still awake?" she asked, placing a cup of warm nectar beside him. "Something's wrong," he murmured. "Not pirates, not rebellion. This is too clean, too quiet." She leaned over his shoulder, studying the blinking red zones. "You think it's a new threat? I think it's something we've never seen." 2 weeks later, the truth arrived, not in fire, but in fear. A single escape pod drifted into Zyrian airspace, its hull scorched black, life signs barely registering. Inside was Captain Drell of the Concordat, half dead, babbling in delirium about shadows that ate the stars and voices that unmade minds. Before medics could stabilize him, he gripped Joran's wrist with skeletal fingers and whispered one word, "Vorith." The name meant nothing to Xerians, but Joran's blood ran cold. He remembered it from fragmented Earth archives, classified files from the final days of the Coalition War. Vorith wasn't a species. It was a collective, a hive mind born in the dark between galaxies, feeding not on flesh, but on consciousness itself. They didn't invade planets. They erased them, draining intelligence, memory, identity, until cities stood empty, machines powered down, and even animals wandered in silent confusion, stripped of instinct. They were a myth, Joran said aloud, more to himself than anyone. Vera heard him. Another one? He met her eyes. This one doesn't laugh. The Vorith didn't announce their arrival with fleets or broadcasts. They came as silence, as absence, as the slow, creeping dread that your neighbors no longer recognize your face. Then the border colonies began to fall, not to invasion but to stillness. Surveillance drones returned footage of streets full of people who didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't blink. They simply stood, staring at the sky, as if waiting for something to call them home. Panic flared in the capital. Nobles demanded evacuation. Generals proposed orbital bombardment of infected zones. But Joran, backed by Vera, argued for study, for defense, for unity. We can't fight what we don't understand, he insisted before the High Council. And if we start glassing our own worlds, we become the monsters they fear. His words held barely. Then came the betrayal. Lord Corrin, long disgraced but never exiled, re-emerged, not as a traitor, but as a savior. He claimed to have uncovered a Vorith infiltration agent within the palace itself, and his evidence pointed directly at Joran. He is human, Corrin declared before a stunned assembly. His mind is fragile, easily influenced. The Vorith whisper to the weak-willed, who better to serve as their vessel than an outsider who never truly belonged. Whispers spread. Old prejudices resurfaced. Even some of Joran's human comrades were questioned, their loyalty scrutinized. Vera stood firm, but the strain showed in the new lines around her eyes, the way her hand trembled when she signed orders. Then, during a routine inspection of the royal armory, a containment breach was reported. Strange energy signatures, matching those from Vorith-affected zones, were traced to a hidden compartment in Joran's quarters. Inside, a pulsing, obsidian shard humming with alien resonance. Joran denied planting it. Vera believed him, but the court did not. He was placed under house arrest, his access to defense systems revoked, his daughters forbidden from seeing him. The girls cried for days. Lyra, the bolder of the two, tried to sneak into his wing with a smuggled comms pad. She was caught, and for the first time Vera had to discipline her own child with cold protocol. Alone in his chambers, Joran didn't rage. He thought, and then he remembered. The shard. He'd seen one before on Earth in a derelict bunker buried beneath Siberian ice. It wasn't a weapon. It was a beacon. The Vorith used them to anchor their presence in physical space. But only if activated. Someone had planted it. But why? That night, under cover of a sandstorm, Ren and Lyra, still loyal, still sharp, slipped past palace guards using old infiltration tricks. They brought tools, data chips, and a grim smile. "We're getting you out," Ren said. "No," Joran replied. "I need to stay, but I need you to do something else." He gave them coordinates to the old human refugee ship, still docked in the orbital yard, untouched for years. "Find the black box from the engine core. It recorded everything during our jump to Xyrus. Everything." While they were gone, Joran requested an audience with Vera, not as a prisoner but as her husband. She came after midnight, cloaked in shadows, her royal guards dismissed. "They're setting me up," he said simply. "Corrin isn't working alone. He's being used." She frowned. "By whom?" "By someone who wants us divided. Who wants Xyrus weak before the Vorith arrive in force." Her breath caught. "You think the Vorith are already here?" "Not their ships. Their ideas. Their whispers. They don't need armies if they can make us destroy ourselves." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I never doubted you." "I know," he said softly. "But you have to act like you did. Let them think they've won." 2 days later, the Vorith struck. Not with silence, but with sound. A psychic shockwave rolled across the capital. Citizens collapsed in the streets, screaming of voices in their skulls. The royal AI network went berserk, spewing corrupted data, locking doors, rerouting power. In the chaos, Corrin declared martial law, proclaiming himself regent in Vera's moment of weakness. But Vera was not weak. From her private sanctum, she activated a failsafe Jorn had helped design, a neural firewall woven into the palace's biocircuitry, keyed to her DNA. It severed the Voritha's psychic grip on the central systems. Lights stabilized, doors unlocked, and in the armory Joran, freed by loyal guards who'd seen through the deception, met Vera with a pulse rifle in hand and fire in his eyes. Together, they moved through the palace like ghosts. Joran disabled Corrin's private guard with non-lethal takedowns, while Vera confronted the traitor in the throne room. Corrin stood before the royal dais, flanked by 2 armored enforcers, a Vorith shard glowing in his palm. "You're too late," he sneered. "The ascension has begun." The Vorith offer transcendence, freedom from flesh, from pain, from choice. "You're not ascending," Vera said coldly. "You're surrendering." Then Joran stepped from the shadows. "And you left the beacon active." Corrin's eyes widened. "What?" "The shard doesn't just receive signals," Joran said, tapping his earpiece. "It transmits them. And right now it's broadcasting your location to every Vorith node within 10 light years." Corrin paled. "No." "Oh yes," Joran said. "You invited them, but you forgot one thing." "What?" "We're not your only guests." Above the planet, the sky split open, not with Vorith ships, but with a fleet of mismatched vessels. Human refugee cruisers, Concordat destroyers, even Gorthan slavers flying truce flags. Ren and Lyra hadn't just retrieved the black box. They'd sent out a distress call in every language, on every channel, using Joran's old coalition codes. The galaxy hadn't forgotten the humans who fought for strangers. The Battle of Silent Dawn began not with guns, but with silence-breaking frequencies, sonic pulses tuned to disrupt Vorith neural harmonics, developed by Ren and Zirian xenolinguists in secret. The Vorith, unaccustomed to resistance that fought with sound instead of against it, recoiled. On the ground, Joran and Vera led a strike team into the heart of the Vorith signal, a buried temple beneath the capital, where Corrin had opened a dimensional rift. There, in a chamber pulsing with black light, floated a Vorith core, a writhing mass of thought and shadow, whispering promises of peace through oblivion. Joran didn't hesitate. He primed 3 thermal charges, 1 for the core, 2 for the rift stabilizers. "Go!" he shouted to Vera, but she grabbed his arm. "Not without you." They ran as the temple collapsed behind them, the Vorith shrieking in a language that hurt the soul. Above, the Allied fleet held the sky. Below, the people of Xyrus Prime, human and Zirian alike, fought side by side, not as subjects but as neighbors. When the dust settled, Corrin was gone, consumed by the rift he'd opened. The Vorith signal faded. The silence lifted. In the aftermath, the galaxy changed. The human-Zirian alliance became a beacon of cooperation. Joran, once a refugee, was named Grand Strategist of the Interstellar Defense Pact. Vera, once a queen who laughed at myths, became a symbol of unity. And their daughters Lyra, who dreamed of piloting starships, and Senna, who could calm storms with her songs, grew up knowing no border between species, only the bond of shared survival. Years later, on the anniversary of the battle, an old man with white-streaked hair and a limp sat with his queen in the sand gardens, watching their grandchildren play. The twins' children, some with white hair, some with dark, chased fireflies and built castles from memory sand that glowed in the dark. Vera leaned her head on Joran's shoulder. "Do you ever miss Earth?" He smiled. "Every day. But I found a new home." She kissed his weathered cheek. "And I found a warrior who taught me that the greatest strength isn't in never falling, but in always getting back up." Above them, the twin suns set, and the stars emerged, not as distant myths, but as promises kept. Time softened the edges of war but never dulled the brilliance of what had been built in its wake. The Vorith threat, though not fully extinguished, had been pushed back into the uncharted voids beyond galactic reach, contained by a coalition forged in desperation and cemented by trust. Joran, once a nameless soldier on a dying world, now walked the halls of the newly christened Unity Spire, a towering structure at the heart of the capital, where human engineers and Zirian architects had merged steel with living crystal, logic with elegance, past with future. His limp had worsened with age, but his spirit hadn't. Every morning, he still rose before dawn to check the perimeter sensors, not out of fear, but habit, a quiet ritual of vigilance that had become his form of prayer. And every morning, without fail, Vera would bring him a cup of spiced nectar, her white hair catching the first light, her smile as steady as the twin suns. Their love had not faded with years. If anything, it deepened, like desert roots that grow stronger the drier the soil. They argued sometimes, as all long-married couples do, over whether the palace kitchens should serve Earth-style pancakes or Xyrian sky puffs for festival mornings, over which grandchild had inherited Joran's stubbornness. It was little Miko, Lyra's youngest, who once dismantled a security drone to see how it dreamed. But they always reconciled with laughter, often in the middle of the night, whispering secrets only they remembered. Lyra became a starship captain, commanding the Dawn Chaser, a sleek hybrid vessel built from salvaged Coalition tech and Xyrian bioengineering. She charted safe routes through the neutral sectors, escorting refugee convoys of dozens of species, always carrying a small sand lily planted in a hydropod on her bridge, a gift from her mother. Senna, the quieter twin, became a xenolinguist and composer, her voice broadcast across the Alliance as a calming frequency during diplomatic crises. She once performed a symphony that blended Earth violin with Xyrian harmonic crystals, and it was said that even hardened warlords wept in its presence. Their grandchildren, 9 in total, from both daughters, filled the palace with noise, questions, and impossible inventions. One built a hover toy that only responded to jokes. Another taught the palace's AI to recite Earth nursery rhymes in Old Xyrian. They called Joran Grandpa Thunder and Vera Grandma Moon, and both names were spoken with equal parts awe and affection. On their 50th anniversary, the entire Alliance declared a day of peace. No drills, no patrols, no treaties signed or broken. Just music, shared meals, and open gates between species who once saw each other as monsters. The celebration was held in the Grand Oasis, where sand lilies bloomed in every color imaginable, nourished by Lyra's final invention, a self-sustaining water lattice that turned desert into garden without draining the planet's core. Ren, now white-haired and wise, ran a healing academy where human triage techniques blended with Xyrian bioempathy. Even the old Gorthan slaver who'd once fought against Joran on Krell 7 came, bearing a ceremonial dagger forged from the hull of his former warship, now melted down and reshaped into a plowshare. Joran stood at the center of it all, arm in arm with Vera, watching their family weave through the crowd like stars through a clear night sky. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think a happy ending meant surviving the battle." Vera smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And now I know it means getting to watch your great-granddaughter try to teach a robotic dog how to fetch her homework." They both laughed, the sound mingling with the music, the chatter, the hum of 1,000 different lives living together. Later that evening, as the twin moons rose, they walked alone through the sand gardens, just as they had decades ago. The air was cool, scented with jasmine and memory. Joran's steps were slower now, his breath a little shorter, but his hand in hers was as sure as ever. "We did it," he said. "We did," she agreed. "Not just survival, not just peace, but belonging." Years later, when Joran passed quietly in his sleep, surrounded by family, his last words a murmured earth lullaby to a newborn great-grandson with white hair and dark eyes, the entire Alliance mourned. Monuments were erected, ships named in his honor, schools built in his name. But Vera knew his true legacy wasn't in stone or steel. It was in every human child who learned Xyrian poetry. It was in every Xyrian elder who smiled at the sound of an old Earth song. It was in the way their daughters raised their children to see difference not as danger, but as wonder. Vera lived 20 more years, ruling gently, writing memoirs, and tending the sand gardens with her grandchildren. When her time came, she was found seated beneath the twin moons, a half-finished braid in her lap, a smile on her lips, as if she'd simply drifted off to join the man who had once been a myth and became her everything. They were buried together beneath the oldest sand lily tree, its roots entwined with earth soil and Xyrian crystal. And every year, on the day the twin suns aligned, the tree bloomed with flowers that shimmered like starlight and smelled faintly of rain and gunpowder. A fragrance that spoke of war, yes, but more importantly, of the peace that followed. Their story became more than legend. It became a promise. That kindness can outlast conquest, that love can bridge galaxies, and that sometimes the most powerful warriors are the ones who choose to build rather than destroy. And in the quiet heart of the desert, under endless skies, their children, and their children's children, lived not just in peace, but in joy, laughter, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest act of compassion could change the universe.